blah, 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 blah. Sorry. Right, we are mid underwater shoot. In fact, we're on day 4. It's been a little bit slow, but it is January. And earlier on, I decided to ask the public, you guys that are watching this, do you have any questions that are underwater related? Fire them over to us on social media and we will answer them. We were going to do it on Instagram, but we've decided to do it for this YouTube video instead. So we will go through the questions. First up, do you have a thermometer on the camera to give live updates on water temperature? No, we do not, but good idea. Is Stokes going to make the magic happen? I'll let you answer that.
Trying my hardest, but it ain't happening.
Do you just have the one rod in the water for underwater filming? So generally, yes, but last time around we had two on the spot, which I think at the time hadn't really been done before. It was something a bit different. And I remember one thing you said about that was how hard it was to, not hard as such, but how close the rigs had to be.
Yeah. Like, it felt like the rigs were literally inches apart, and both the casts obviously had to be spot on to allow the room to fit both rigs in.
Whereas where I was looking at the screen, it looked to me like they were several feet apart. So yeah, that was quite strange. Right, how many times do you get up and run to the rods as a carp pick up the bait but didn't take it? Well, unfortunately,
as of yet, we've not seen a single carp pick up the bait.
How do carp react to dropping a rig over them with a baiting pole? I feel like I did this once in the first underwater film we did, and they did move off, whether it was the pole, whether it's coincidence. It certainly, we didn't see the rig falling amongst them and then them spook, but they were there, we put the pole out and they moved off during the process. So we haven't actually had the opportunity to watch a rig literally drop in amongst them, but all with a good time. How do you decide on a venue? Are there any special permissions needed? Yes, the first thing is clarity. Second thing is permission, of course. You do need permission. The camera's ideally it's got to be in the water for a little while. We don't just want to leave it somewhere where it can get stolen, things like that. So water clarity is the main thing, and permission is probably the second most important. Has underwater filming changed your mind on the amount of bait you should be putting in?
That's a tough question. Not really. I mean, we've not had enough feeding going on or whatever. Maybe if we'd had groups of carp coming in, feeding for hours on end and not caught anything, maybe we'd have thought, oh, but we've literally had odd carp coming in, and have mouthful, so it's a tough one to answer.
What about when the amount of bait you're putting out compared to how it looks on the bottom? Does it look more, less, or exactly as you would expect it?
Again, it's a tough one to say, really, isn't it? I mean, thinking back to the last shoot, probably looks less, I'd say, than you expect it to.
I would agree.
Like, I'd say generally, both of these shoots now, we've actually put out more bait than I would normally put out in a normal fishing situation, just so it looks like we've got a decent spread of bait in front of the lens.
Are you feeding maggots to see what they prefer against the other bait, presuming there are fish?
Yeah, well, we are feeding maggots. Most of the bait we're putting out is maggots. But yeah, unfortunately, we haven't had enough feeding to say what they prefer.
Out of the lot. Yeah. We've seen some interesting stuff, though, haven't we, in terms of what the maggots do once they're underwater?
Yeah, the last spot we fished, it was sort of a bowl, wasn't it? Like a depression with like a rock in the middle. And the maggots definitely found their way to the lowest point of the spot, didn't they? The majority of the maggots ended up round the rock, which was obviously lowest point of the spot.
Slowly but surely, they just kind of wriggle their little way across, don't they? And talking of wriggling, these after
24 hours at least, they were still alive. Obviously, they all seem to be pretty motionless now, but we've not put any bait in for 48 hours. But maggots,
cold
yeah,
water as well.
Freezing cold water, and maggots do stay alive for at least 24 hours underwater, which is quite surprising, really.
How blatant are bowstring tight or semi-stacked lines? Okay, we haven't really seen the line, but one thing we did see before was your leader kind of it would ever so slightly poke up off the bottom where...
Yeah. Where the spot was raised,
Yeah.
at the back of the spot was raised, as it sloped down into the spot, there was definitely separation between the leader and the ground.
Yeah.
That was when we was using lead core. Now I've got a fluorocarbon leader on and you can't see it at all.
It's literally gone and it's completely invisible to fluorocarbon. And I tell you what, we did see, didn't we? We had the, remember when you were sinking your lines and I said I could see the leader twitching?
Yeah. Just the gentlest flick on the line and it was moving the leader.
Spook some fish off the spot and, with a lead and see how long it takes for them to come back.
Well, as it stands at the minute, it's taking long enough for them to turn up in the flipping first place, so the last thing we're going to do is spook them off.
But one thing we did do yesterday, the lake was empty. The problem we've got is we're stuck to the spot. So we have one spot that we can fish where the camera is, and we are relying on the carp being here. Unfortunately, both trips we've done to this lake, they have been almost entirely at the other end of the lake. The whole stock in one big ball. And we did go out there yesterday with marker rods, casting around, trying to scare them, but reenacting the angler's presence, thinking we'd move them on. It's quite shallow water. There were loads of carp there, and we cast 100 times, do you reckon, between the pair of us?
Yeah.
They went
easily.
nowhere. They did not leave the area, which was really surprising. You'd think that they would go after a few casts. And in a fishing situation, I bet if we'd have gone out there and put 3 single hook baits out, they'd all have gone.
Well, what I was going to say though today, you can see why people do get such big hits in the winter, because when the carp do find an area that they like, obviously they're grouped up, they're in that area, and as we sort of proved yesterday, or as the carp proved, you know, sometimes they just don't want to move.
Regardless of what you do, yeah. Most valuable info you've learned from the filming, bait, rigs, etc.
Most valuable info. Well, it's hard to say, isn't it, at the minute? So little happened, really.
I think the way your rigs sit is obviously a big thing.
Yeah, that's been the biggest thing I've taken from this underwater shoot. Is obviously I've got my D rigs that I've used for many years, sat in front of the cameras, and when I'm casting them out, I've always envisaged them. I always fish them on a helicopter setup. And I've always envisaged that obviously when you cast out that they sort of naturally fall beyond the lead, when that is not the case at all, is it? Like probably 90% of the time they sort of fall out to the side but slightly back, which is interesting. But basically they don't sit how I've always imagined they do.
In terms of bait, I think obviously the way the maggots move underwater, that's quite a big thing.
The bait boat drop as well. That was interesting. How even though this spot we're fishing now is probably only what 5 or 6 foot, 5.5 foot deep?
5.5
foot deep. We're dropping with a bait boat because it's quite far out in the lake, and it's really apparent how even in that depth of water we've had quite a strong left to right crosswind every time we've dropped. And the bait always ends up slightly beyond and right of the rig, even in that depth of water.
And last time around, when we were spomming, well, when you were spomming, what was that? 7 foot deep.
Yeah, and in the end, I was fishing. I was clipping the spom up nearly 3 foot
less.
I was clipping the spom nearly 3 foot less than the fishing rods to get the bait to land directly over the rigs.
Which is more than I would have thought. I think more than both would have thought.
But to be honest, in a normal fishing situation, you know, you probably want quite a bit of your bait to land behind your rigs. That doesn't matter too much. But in an underwater situation, especially with that last spot, it was quite silty outside of the spot. So what we didn't want is bait falling outside of shot, really. So obviously I clipped the spom up so it landed directly over the rigs.
Oh, someone has said, I just like you and Tom Stokes, a perfect carp fishing duo.
Oh, thank you very much.
What a very nice person you are, Chris. Chances of capturing underwater footage of a carp reacting to a low zig is definitely something. I think it is actually doable.
Yeah.
If we tilted that camera up, you could do it, couldn't you?
Yeah.
You could do it.
Easily.
So, one for the future, maybe.
You could get a 1 foot zig probably in there.
Yeah, you probably could. I'll make you right. What was the thought process when deciding to do it in February? We want to do them all year round. It's never been done before. You know, a proper cold water. Haven't been that many underwater films made, let alone in the depths of winter, on a lake that, you know, there's not a massive stock of carp in it. You hear numbers, 150, and I'd sometimes hear 200. I would say 150 tops. Whatever we've seen, I don't think I've seen 150 carp.
No.
Not close to that. But there's a big enough head of carp in here to have a chance of a bite, but, you know, not a huge head where it's going to be ridiculously easy. So we just wanted to do something that was hard to achieve, and it has proven to be the case.
But if it had paid off, it'd have been
amazing.
Epic.
Yeah,
that's the risk.
And it still might. It still might.
Yeah.
We've had carp visiting in the last hour.
Yeah.
We've had them here, haven't we? Could you show us how quick PVA bags melt in the winter and how they sit with a pop-up? I think bags melting, that will depend largely on whose PVA you're using, how old it is. Things can change. Maybe one for the future again. But test them in the edge if you're not sure. Chuck them in the margins, it shouldn't be too different to out in the lake. Honest opinion, do you think it's important to match the colour of your lead clips, tubing, etc.?
Personally, I don't. I mean, I've not seen enough action, like fish activity over my rig to say, oh, they've seen that or this. But I'll be honest, in my normal fishing, I don't worry about that too much. I generally use the same colour lead core, same colour heli safes, because I don't really use lead clips. You know, I generally favour a darker colour, and I'll cast that anywhere, and I've caught loads of fish doing it. But in terms of underwater, as I say, we've not seen enough going on over my rigs to say whether that makes a difference or not, unfortunately.
And I would say it's never going to hurt you to do it, but again, it's not something I really worry about. But the better you can blend it in, essentially, the better. Would you ever do a river carp underwater film? Yes, we do plan to do that this year, so watch this space. How visual is the line? How visual is line lay across the spot? I think we kind of spoke about that already, but the two comparisons of what you've used, lead core to fluorocarbon, you're probably two ends of the spectrum there.
Yeah.
Lead core is about as sort of stand out as you can get. Fluoro is about as discreet as you can get, but the difference is big, isn't it?
It's very noticeable. But obviously, you know, they've each got their pros and cons. Obviously, abrasion resistance, etc. You've got a lot of that with lead core, whereas you haven't so much with fluorocarbon. So, yeah, it just depends on where you're fishing and the situation, I guess.
How long do you have the camera in the water before filming and do the carp spook to begin with? It has varied. This camera, the one we're fishing in front of now, has been in the water about 5 weeks. And I would say it's still seeing, well, it looks, doesn't it? It still looks like carp are spooking. We've kind of come to the conclusion that maybe they're not actually that happy over these gravel spots. There aren't many gravel spots in the lake. We have created one by baiting and stuff because you kind of need gravel for this to stop the sediment causing a cloud, which makes the underwater camera useless. Whether they're spooking off the camera or not, not sure, but it does seem, from the ones I've done so far, the shoots I've been on, that at times certain fish, they do appear to look at the camera, get close to the camera and then spook off. But there's been other times when there are carp literally feeding right in front of it. So maybe it depends on the fish themselves. This camera's been in for 5 weeks. The other cameras, when we've done it, they haven't been in for that long. Some fish don't seem to care, others do. So hard one to give a proper definitive answer to. What's the most eye-opening thing that you've learned whilst filming submerged? I would say how often fish do actually come through. You see them a lot. When you look out at the lake, you'd think there wasn't a carp in sight, and actually they do swim past way more often than you think. And the only way you'd really get a proper gauge of that is to stand up a tree watching all day, if you have the ability in the edge, for example. But I think they come through more regularly. Obviously, this is a little bit different now, middle of winter. They are balled up, like you say, and at the polar opposite end of the lake. But when they are here, they, you know, to look out, you may not see anything for hours, but quite often they are just drifting through, even if they don't feed. And what would you say the most eye-opening thing you've learned? You've had a bit of a bad underwater experience, really.
Oh, mate, I've had a terrible... I'm cursed with these underwater shoots. I've spent many hours now in front of these underwater cameras, not only with these guys, but I also spent a bit of time behind the Corda underwater cameras last spring, and yeah, I've not seen a great deal, to be honest, in terms of fish feeding.
Rig-specific underwater films would be a good idea. A whole film on one rig, etc. to be honest, that's kind of what we've done. This Stokesy would be the third person. So the first one was myself, second one was Steve Renyard, and then it was Tom. Each one of those films was kind of centered around one rig. There has been little tweaks and changes, but you know, you've used the same rig and set up throughout pretty much, haven't you? I did that. Steve Renyard mixed it up a little bit, but it was the obvious, you know, rigs that Steve is associated with. So that is kind of what we want to see. We want to see how certain anglers' rigs, particularly the ones that they use the most and or are most well known for, perform underwater. And yeah, we learn something about all those presentations every time we look at them. Can you also bust the tight line lifting lead core off the bottom myth? From what you've seen, would you say it does?
I mean, from what we saw last, it all depends on the range of fishing, doesn't it? That because when we were fishing last time in the other swim, it was only 15 wraps out, and I was only flicking the line, and you could see it visually lifting the lead core. So if I'd have fished that tight, it'd have stayed lifted. But if you're 100 yards out in the pond like we are now, you could probably get away with a tight line. Yeah, I think that is very range dependent. That.
Right. A couple of questions about moon phases. Are they affected by moon phase? I'd say, I mean, from what we've seen on the underwater cameras, really hard to say that, but through fishing over the years, I would say yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably agree.
Definitely.
Have you ever filmed marine underwater firefighting divers?
What?
No. Do carp detect the electrical current or pulses from the equipment? We know they're inquisitive and will look, but do they feel electricity like other fish species? There is a potential for that, isn't there?
Yeah,
and even
definitely.
from what we've seen here, you do see carp appear in front of the screen. When they get close to the camera,
and they always seem to spook. Why are they spooking? Are they spooking because they've seen it, or are they spooking because they feel something?
Yeah.
But we don't know.
we don't know. Have you noticed that certain combinations of baits grab a carp's attention and get them to feed better than others?
Well, whatever I'm putting out there doesn't seem to be doing that.
I think one thing we've kind of, having sat in front of this screen, when I look back at the ones I've done in the past in the warmer weather, I think when a carp feeds, it's far more likely to feed again. Whereas on both of these shoots we've done at this lake, we've had carp feed plenty of times, but they only ever seem to feed for short periods and then they're gone again and they don't seem to come back. Largely down to the time of year, I would have thought, and the fact they don't actually need food as much or probably want it as much. You'd think sweet corn and maggot would be an irresistible.
We've definitely seen it. We've seen it. We've seen them swim past very slow. They're definitely clocking the bait. The odd one will drop down and have a mouthful. But like Elliott says, I just don't think the time of the year, they don't need it. So they're not, you know, they're having a mouthful because it's there and it's available to them, but they don't really need it. And
it's not as irresistible. This hasn't seemed as irresistible as I would think it would be.
No.
The fact of so many carp, I don't know, I say so many. What do you reckon we've had? 7 or 8 times when a fish is fed, but not come back?
Yeah.
And I just think they would. I thought, if you can get them to have one mouthful, surely they're going to come back for more.
I mean, we've got maggots, corn and crumb out there, which is, given a choice, that they're the baits that I'd use all the time in the winter. Obviously, you've got worms and casters. I've not really fished with worms a lot, but I've done quite a bit of fishing with casters. We could have tried that, but in my mind, I'd think if they ain't going to eat that, you know, are they going to eat anything?
Probably not.
Maybe if it was in the right place. I think where we are here at the minute, it's just a passing point in it, and we've just got the odd almost drive-by. They drive by, swim by, have one mouthful, they carry on their way. They're not actually holding in this area in front of us, and I think that's the problem.
I think, what we've done here in the winter has highlighted things that we probably already knew to a degree, is that the location above all else. Yes, that's important during the summer, but if you sit in this, if we'd have sat here for 4 or 5 days in July, it doesn't matter all the carp were up there to begin with, they'd have come back.
Yeah, and they wouldn't have all been together anyway.
Yes.
Carp in the warmer months, carp are naturally more spread out throughout the lake. So you're going to get more fish traffic. They're hungrier. This time of year, they're generally grouped up in one area, as we've seen, which just, you know, it reduces the amount of traffic you're getting, and we need traffic for,
Yeah.
you know.
If we'd have been up there, I'd just...
Yeah. If we'd have been
It'd been
lucky and had the
amazing.
camera in that swim, we could have absolutely had it off this week.
Yeah.
You know, the carp have been grouped up in front of 2 swims for pretty much the whole duration of this shoot. But unfortunately, you can't just lift the camera out, go down there and plonk it back in and hope that they're all going to stay there and then start feeding in front of it.
Right, the last question. This will be the last question because I've gone through most of them. Have you found that the carp are scared more when you apply the camera whilst wearing Speedos? And I'm yet to try that. So maybe for our next one, Tom,
We'll get the Speedos out.
We'll get the Speedos out, yeah. Well, there we go. There's a few little things we've learned. I'm sure we'll continue to keep learning. In fact, I'm sure we will continue to keep learning. But for now, that is all. Thanks for your questions and goodbye. And wish us luck because we've still got 24 hours left.
Yeah, we need some luck at the minute.